Hello, hello! It's Christmas Day, and I am finally making another voiceover video. A little gift to you. We're gonna be working on a Draw This in Your Style today. This is a very winter-themed Draw This in Your Style piece. I really couldn't resist this Snow Queen elf. This is totally the type of character that draws me in, so yeah, this is what I'm working on. The original design is by Maddie Arts on Instagram, and you can see it over there in the top left corner. It's a really cute kind of paper cutout style that she has. It's quite different from my own, but has some similarities, so I think that it was a fun Draw This in Your Style piece to tackle. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about my process and perhaps anything else that comes to mind. So let's just jump right in. First, I very roughly sketch in my piece. I'm specifically trying to find the pose and the feeling that I like for the step. My preferred way to digital sketch is to use a large brush to block my sketch in and carve away with the eraser when necessary. I kind of like to approach my rough sketches like sculpting. The specific brush that I'm using for this sketch is a default Clip Studio brush called the Transparent Watercolor brush. I especially love to use the eraser to help me push the expression of characters to get that really cute and kind of squishable looking face in her cheeks and her mouth. So you can see that I use the eraser to kind of carve away at the bottom of her eye to help brighten her whole smile up a bit. Next, I make a new layer for line art. For the line art, I like to use a rougher, more pencil or crayon looking brush. I don't really like using super crisp line art brushes. I really like the rougher look when it comes to line art. Here I used my favorite brush from the Friendin brush pack, which I highly recommend. It is a paid brush pack, but it comes with so many brushes that I think it is totally worth it if you are a Clip Studio Paint user. This brush is called Teague's Folly RNG. Also notice that I don't really add much line art to her hair. I've noticed that most of the time I end up erasing or painting over any line art I do for hair anyway, and I really like to feel free and intuitive when I paint hair, so I have just stopped doing line art for it altogether. That way, when I go into the actual painting and colors, I don't feel constricted at all by any of the shapes that maybe I had drawn in the line art. Next is the flat colors. I put all of the flat colors onto one layer underneath the line art. I used to do each color on its own separate layer, but I've been trying to simplify my layer setup over the past few months, and now I really prefer to use less layers. So yes, all of the flat colors on one layer. The only exception in this piece is that I did put her cape on its own layer on top of everything so that I could adjust the opacity of it. Once I have the flats blocked in, I stay on that same layer and add some details using a soft airbrush, like adding a little bit of blush to the cheeks, painting in some color to the lips, adding a soft color variation to her hair and dress, stuff like that. The stuff that's really soft but adds a lot of life to your colors. It's also at this point where I paint some soft color variation into the background so that I can start to see what the piece will look like as a whole. Now it's time to block in the basic shading. So I create a new layer and choose a light blue color, and then change the layer mode to multiply. The actual color that I choose here doesn't really matter at this point, since I'll probably adjust the color later with the hue and saturation sliders and just find a color that I think looks good. Basically, all that's important right now is finding a color that I can just see as I block in the shapes of the shadows. For blocking in the shading, I just went back to using the Teague's Folly RNG brush, the same brush that I used for the line art. That way there's still some texture to it. Once the shading is blocked in, I use another Clip Studio default brush, the Smooth Watercolor brush, to soften the shading, especially in the face and on the skin, so that there's a smoother transition in the form shadows. And by the way, if you are interested in a slightly more in-depth tutorial on how I do shading, I did a webinar with Wacom and Clip Studio Paint, and that webinar is still available to watch if you want to go check it out. Anyway, it's important to keep the cast shadows more hard-edged, so don't go too crazy with softening everything or it will be way too muddy and it won't look crisp where it needs to look crisp. Here I started adding the snowflake. I used the symmetrical ruler tool in Clip Studio Paint to make it way easier to draw. It's a fun little trick, and it's super fun to play with for designs like this. Next, I'm going to make a new layer for highlights. Mostly I'm going to use this layer for the hair to make it look shiny. I believe I set the new layer to an overlay layer, and then I choose a light blue color to block in the highlights. Her cape material is also kind of shiny, so I added some highlights there, and as well as in the ice crown. Now is the scary part. At this point, I actually merge all of my character layers together into one so that I can color adjust everything all on one layer and paint on top of the whole thing. So you maybe noticed that I pumped up the contrast a bit and pushed back the reds. Now that she's all merged, I'm just gonna use the brush and paint in refining details on top of everything. So this is all on one layer. And honestly, it can be a little difficult to see what's happening in this part of the process because it's really all about the small details. So the changes are quite small, but it just helps the whole piece feel more complete and refined. So I actually streamed the process of this whole piece over on Twitch, and there were some people who asked partway through the process, why don't I consider the piece done yet? And you know, in the past, I maybe would have considered this piece complete after I had finished the highlights. But as I've gained more experience and more practice with my art, I have noticed that I have more patience to sit and do these little refinements at the end to my pieces, even though it takes a bit of extra time. I think it's worth it to just help the piece feel more polished and complete. Once I refine the piece to where I think it's almost done, it's time to add a little overlay and glow layers to make certain areas and colors really pop and feel magical. So here I added a little bit of rim light, but I ended up not really liking it when it was so bright, so I toned it back to a light blue instead of a blown out white. For the background, I just added some dots and then motion blurred them to make them look like snow. After that, I was wanting a little bit more depth in the blue gradient. So I actually just went to the internet and grabbed a random photo, blurred the shit out of it, and reduced the opacity to almost 0. You can't actually see anything that's happening in the photo, but it does add a little bit more color and shape variation to the background gradient. Here I was playing with giving her an ice shard earring, but I kept feeling like it was looking a little bit too much like a tooth or something. It was just looking weird. So I ended up just going with a little snowflake, and I think it worked out pretty well. So again, wanting a little bit more variation with the background, so I'm trying out a big swooshy shape to help guide the eye, and then I, again, just like blur the shit out of it, and that is pretty much the last step with this piece. So here's what I came out with. Overall, I quite like how she came out. I can't help but feel like she came out looking very Disney-ish, which isn't a bad thing, but also it's not something I was deliberately intending. The piece made me realize that I don't usually draw this kind of shiny, sheer fabric very often, but it's pretty fun, so maybe I need to draw more characters wearing pretty dresses. I don't know. Anyway, I hope you like her. If you want to catch me over on Twitch, I am live working on artwork, chatting, squatting, and answering questions over there every Friday, and sometimes on Wednesdays. I hope you have a happy holidays and a wonderful winter season. Until next time, bye!